Chrollo is trying to steal Parallel Future, Tessierdnich's new Nen technique. You know what's crazy? He doesn't even know that yet. But why? And how is Chrollo hunting down a Nen technique that even he doesn't fully understand? Well, all in order to make sure that the next time that him and Hisoka come face to face, the second deathmatch is not nearly as close as the first one. But how is Hisoka gonna hunt down Tessierdnich? How would Parallel Future be stolen by Skill Hunter? And why does Chrollo need to steal the Kakin Empire's national treasures before he steals this legendary ability? Well, today we're gonna be answering all those questions and a whole lot more, because today we're talking Chrollo's new power-up is broken. But before we get to talking about Chrollo peeking into the future with the stolen ability, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for an additional Nick video every single week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We're on to Gaara versus Naruto. If I had to do a reaction series to HunterxHunter, would you guys join the fourth wall and watch that? Put it out there. I'm 80 episodes into Naruto right now, which would be halfway through HunterxHunter, so could happen. So, for those of you who don't remember exactly what's happening in HunterxHunter right now, especially on the Black Whale, Hisoka snuck onto the Black Whale, and when the Phantom Troop heard that Hisoka would be on the Black Whale, they all also snuck onto the Black Whale. Now, as to why Hisoka decided to sneak onto the Black Whale, we don't really know. But we know that the Phantom Troop is on the Black Whale because they want to kill Hisoka. And more specifically, the legs of the Phantom Troop, that is to say, everybody but Chrollo, wants to kill Hisoka before Chrollo gets a chance to kill Hisoka. Because the Phantom Troop believes that if Chrollo is to enter into combat with Hisoka once again, either he could die while fighting against Hisoka, or the things that he needs to do to his body and or Skill Hunter in order to prepare to defeat Hisoka once and for all could change Chrollo into an entirely different person. And honestly, these fears aren't unwarranted. What we know from Chrollo right now is that he's walking around the Black Whale trying to hunt down somebody specific with a very interesting and rare ability. See, Chrollo believes that before his second deathmatch with Hisoka, he needs to evolve Skill Hunter. Skill Hunter being his specialist Nen technique that allows for him to steal other people's Nen techniques. However, in order to evolve Skill Hunter, Chrollo believes that he needs to steal the Kakin Empire's national treasures. But why does Chrollo need to evolve Skill Hunter? What will that evolution look like? How does it include the national treasures? And who is Chrollo looking for? While we don't necessarily have the answer to any of those questions, today we're gonna try and find the answer. And thus we need to start by talking about what Chrollo is currently doing. See, Chrollo is currently walking around the lower levels of the Black Whale using a Nen technique called Love Dial 6700. Now, Love Dial 6700 is a stolen Nen ability. This ability allows for you to find an ideal partner by essentially punching into this flip phone exactly what you want to find in somebody. And once you punch in some criteria for the kind of person that you're looking for, the phone gives you a number, and when you call that number, the phone guides you to that person. And thus, in a sense, it's kind of a Nen-based dating app. If you say, hey, I want to find a murderous dog man, it'll give you a phone number and you'll be directed to the murderous dog man who's a part of Morena's group. But that's not what Chrollo is looking for. And while we don't necessarily have any idea what Chrollo is actually looking for, most fans theorize that Chrollo was looking for either a specialist or a very broken Nen technique to add into Skill Hunter so that when he goes into battle against Hisoka a second time, he'll be more powerful than the first time he fought him in Heaven's Arena. And thus people believe that Love Dial 6700 is pointing Chrollo towards Tessierdnich. But because Chrollo most likely just input, lead me towards a specialist with a ridiculously powerful Nen technique that's able to change fate and possibly even time, Chrollo doesn't necessarily understand that he is being directed at Tessierdnich, or even that he's being directed towards stealing Parallel Future. And that's what makes the idea of Chrollo having Love Dial 6700 so ridiculous. See, Chrollo's entire gambit is that he's a thief. He is the head of a thief group. His Nen ability is to steal Nen techniques from other people, and therefore when you give him an ability like Love Dial 6700, he's able to essentially scout out Nen techniques that he could steal without even fully understanding what they are. And the reasoning that a lot of people use to conclude that Chrollo is most likely hunting down Tessierdnich is the fact that Chrollo was unable to find the person that he was looking for using the phone number on the lower levels of the Black Whale. See, Chrollo tries to use Love Dial 6700 in a massive crowd on the lower levels. fails, but he strikes out, and he remembers that the same thing happened in the Heavens Arena. And while Chrollo considers loosening the conditions of what his ideal partner actually looks like, Chrollo tries once again, and the phone tells him that while the person he's looking for does exist, it's outside of the effective Nen range of Love Dial 6700. It's a dumb name for a Nen technique. And thus Chrollo comes to the conclusion that the person who he's looking for must be above him. We need to remember that the black whale is absolutely massive. It's carrying 250,000 people right now. Chrollo coming to the conclusion that this person is above him is important, because what is above Chrollo other than the upper tiers of the black whale? Like tier 1, where the majority of the royal princes and the majority of the succession contest fighting is happening. And thus whether or not Chrollo is actually being directed towards Tessie Erdnich or not, he is being directed in Tessie Erdnich's direction. But why would the phone direct him towards Tessie Erdnich? Well, we've already lightly touched on it. Like we said, he may not actually be looking for Tessie Erdnich, like specific. He may be looking for a person whose Nen technique matches a very specific set of criteria, and that person could just so happen to be Tessie Erdnich. But what is that very specific set of criteria? Well, more likely than not, Chrollo is looking for a specialist, with somebody with a Nen technique that couldn't usually be stolen by Skill Hunter, and somebody whose Nen technique is powerful enough to kill Hisoka. Now, what's important to identify here is that Love Dial 6700 has been used multiple times leading up to the moment where Chrollo was told that the person he's looking for exists. What's also important to note here is that it's not really until Tessie Erdnich awakens to this ability that Chrollo gets a ping that the person he's looking for does exist. But I said something in there that might have perked up a couple of your ears. That one of the criteria that Chrollo could be searching with would be somebody with a Nen technique that Skill Hunter cannot usually steal. So what does that mean? Well, we've seen Chrollo steal some absolutely ludicrous Nen abilities, like Black Voice, Future Writing Pens, Gallery Fake. The Nen techniques of the Kakian royal princes may lay outside of the bounds of what Skill Hunter can traditionally steal. See, in order for Chrollo to steal a Nen technique, usually, the target then has to place their hand on Skill Hunter, and then if all of that happens within a specified, relatively short amount of time, then and only then can Chrollo make off with their Nen technique. Now, there's other restrictions that come along with Skill Hunter as well, like that Nen technique can only be used so long as the original caster is still alive, and then that only one of these abilities, unless Chrollo uses Double Face, his bookmark ability, I believe that's what it's called, can be used at a time. However, how do you see an ability that allows for somebody simply by activating Zetsu to peer into the future? See, because to everybody within Tessie Erdnich's immediate purview, nothing really changes. Tessie Erdnich activates Zetsu, peers into the future, and then experiences the future that he peers into. And he, and only he, has the information about what's to come in that upcoming future. Now, to everybody else, this would just look like a standard flow of time. You might see Tessie Erdnich activate Zetsu if you're fast enough, but still, so far as an identifiable Nen technique, it's not really one, at least comparatively to all of the other Nen techniques that we've seen Chrollo steal using Skill Hunter. Not to mention that this parallel future Nen technique is tied to a Nen piece created by the Seed Urn, and therefore just simply comes from a power system that might fall out of the purview of Skill Hunter, which brings us to why Chrollo is seemingly trying to steal the Kakin national treasures. See, Chrollo himself has already stated that he needs to steal the Kakin national treasures in order to evolve Skill Hunter. Now, these three items are the Seed Urn, the Lotus Anchorite, and the Sword of Good Omens. Three treasures that are not only just incredibly valuable to the Kakin Empire, but also three treasures that are heavily involved in the secession contest. And therefore, because Chrollo understands how incredibly guarded these treasures are, he states that before he can steal the technique that he wants to steal, he has to steal something equivalent to a national treasure. And this fits Hunter x Hunter's Nen logic perfectly. See, that is personal, it's psychological, its limitations and bonuses are self-imposed. Nen rewards risk, restriction, specificity, and conviction. Kurapika's chains are powerful enough to force people like Uvagin into Zetsu because he stakes his own life on it, and he states that some of his chains will only ever be used on the spiders. Gon is able to turn into a monster capable of fighting Meruem because he sacrifices his entire life. And the same exact ideology has always applied to Skill Hunter. Chrollo is only able to have the incredibly broken ability of theft. A, because he himself is a thief of massive regard, and B, because he has to jump through a bunch of different kinds of conditions to steal a technique in the first place. So stealing a national treasure from the Kakin Empire is not something random. It is a Nen restriction that is required in order for him to steal the Nen technique he believes will allow for him to kill Hisoka. And most likely this Nen restriction has been put in place because, like we already said, Parallel Future does not fall within the traditional rule set of Skill Hunter. It's an ability tied to a ritual in Guardian Spirit Beasts that feeds dead Princess Nen back into an urn that supposedly superpowers the victor of the secession contest. Since Black Whale is filled with techniques that don't lie within the traditional rules of Nen. The Seed Urn gives princes guardian spirits. The Secession War itself is maintained with a gigantic ritual system. Halkenberg's powers require followers, proximity, and body-swapping limitations. Camilla's ability is built around dying. Tessie Erdnich's Parallel Future Nen technique is tied to eliminating Nen from himself by using Zetsu. None of these techniques manifest as traditional Nen techniques. They feel like there's something different, and therefore stealing them should be different from stealing something like Black Voice from Shalnar. And this evolving Skill Hunter may be less about the fact that Chrollo may be too weak to steal these Nen techniques, and more about the fact that Skill Hunter itself needs an amendment to include these different kinds of Nen techniques. And thus Parallel Future, using everything that we know about what Chrollo is currently up to, kind of becomes the perfect target, because it's exactly the type of ability that would be hard for Chrollo to steal. Not only do we not entirely know how this Nen technique works, but it also requires the activation of Zetsu, and it belongs to a prince who's on tier 1 of the Black Whale. But this brings us to one of the most important questions. What would an evolved Skill Hunter look like? Well, there's 5 possibilities. And if 5 sounds like a lot, well, yeah, there's a lot of ways that Skill Hunter may not be sufficient enough to steal Parallel Future. Now, the first and possible most likely upgrade that would happen to Skill Hunter after Chrollo stole the national treasures of the Kakin Empire is that Skill Hunter, moving forward, would have reduced stealing conditions. That is to say that if, in a sense, Chrollo is able to prove that he is the best thief of them all, moving forward, or maybe just for stealing Parallel Future, he may have to hit less of the conditions to steal a technique with Skill Hunter than he usually does. Maybe he doesn't need the target to touch the book. Maybe he doesn't need a full explanation of how the Nen technique works. Or maybe he can just simply steal a technique by observing said technique and identifying the rules surrounding that technique. And getting rid of the limitations of Skill Hunter not only sound convenient, but kind of essential when dealing with Tessie Erdnich. See, because in a 1v1, could Chrollo defeat Tessie Erdnich in a fight? Yeah, probably. Parallel Future is ridiculously broken, and being able to see into the future is basically the best ability we've ever seen in Hunter x Hunter. But Chrollo 1v2'd Zeno and Silva Zoldyck simultaneously against the guy, even with the strongest Nen technique we've ever seen, considering the fact he's only had Nen for a couple of days. I still like Chrollo as our victor. However, while Tessie Erdnich is arrogant, he is not stupid, and therefore, even though Chrollo himself is a genius, the idea of Chrollo being able to trick Tessie Erdnich into all of the requirements for Chrollo to steal his technique seems slim. And therefore, if Chrollo is able to eliminate some of his requirements, like needing an explanation from Tessie Erdnich or needing Tessie Erdnich to touch Skill Hunter, the possibility of him stealing Skill Hunter becomes substantially more likely. But let's say hypothetically Chrollo is able to trick Tessie Erdnich into explaining his technique and into touching Skill Hunter. Another one of the most major weaknesses of Skill Hunter is the fact that when the original user of that Nen technique dies, Chrollo loses access to it. This is why after Hisoka killed Kortabi and Shalnar, Chrollo lost access to Gallery Fake and Black Voice. And thus the evolution for Skill Hunter may be its ability to hold on to Nen techniques even if the original user dies. And if you think about it, even if Chrollo isn't trying to steal Parallel Future, if he's trying to steal a technique from any of the princes, stealing the Nen technique of a prince is a temporary measure at best. Because while most people, after getting their Nen technique stolen, would simply be like, well, you know, I guess I'm just not a hunter anymore, a prince without their Nen technique is an easy target for all the other princes. And therefore, well, maybe Chrollo could steal Parallel Future, and maybe could use it to kill Hisoka in the small amount of time before Tessie Erdnich is taken out by the other princes. If you're gonna go through the rigmarole of stealing a Nen technique from one of the most well-guarded people on Earth, you wanna make sure after you weaken them to the point where they will undoubtedly be killed, you could also hold on to that technique you stole. The third possibility of what an evolved Skill Hunter looks like also addresses one of Skill Hunter's major weaknesses: its inability to allow Chrollo to use two abilities simultaneously. Now, I know what some of you are saying, but Nick, Chrollo can use two techniques simultaneously with his bookmark ability that either allows him to use one Nen technique without holding his book open, or use two Nen techniques if his book is open. And we saw Chrollo use Double Face to great effect in the battle against Hisoka, where he used things like Gallery Fake, Sun and Moon, Order Stamp, Convert Hands, and Black Voice all simultaneously to make a scenario that even Hisoka couldn't figure out. However, Hisoka now understands exactly what Chrollo's Nen restrictions are, and therefore just using a bookmark may not be enough to defeat Hisoka in the next deathmatch, unless an evolved Skill Hunter may simply allow for Chrollo to use as many of his techniques as he wants simultaneously. And if you pair that with something like Parallel Future, well, Chrollo becomes a very tough out very quickly, but maybe not as tough of an out as the fourth possibility presents. Because the fourth possibility for what an evolved Skill Hunter could look like is the ability to steal Nen systems, not just singular Nen techniques. This is a very Black Whale specific theory, but let's remember that Chrollo is trying to steal the Kakian Empire's national treasures, and while obviously stealing these highly guarded national treasures can operate as a Nen restriction for Chrollo, at the same time they are also vessels of massive amounts of energy, and therefore a lot of fans are speculating that Chrollo trying to steal things like the Seed Urn could actually allow for a Skill Hunter to not only steal Nen techniques, but also steal Nen items. See, because if hypothetically Hisoka is able to steal all of the national treasures of the Kakian Empire, he essentially has all of the tools that he needs to host his own succession contest. But that's a whole Nen system. It's a Nen ritual. It's not a Nen technique. But if Chrollo holds on to all of the pieces necessary to create the succession contest, who's to say what he can steal with Skill Hunter will be limited to Nen techniques? He could steal Guardian Spirit Beasts. He could steal the functions of the Seed Urn. He could steal the enforcement of the mechanism of the succession contest, which, mind you, is just a battle royale that leads for all of the people involved funneling their energy back to the Seed Urn, which he may have access to after stealing it. And thus Chrollo, in a sense, could hijack the succession contest and take all of the energy of the succession contest into himself, which is possibly why people like Bonolanov, one of the members of the Phantom Troop, want to make sure that they're able to kill Hisoka before Chrollo is, because the stealing and adaptation of entire Nen systems could permanently change Chrollo. But that's not the only place where concern for Chrollo is coming from, because the fifth and final possibility for what could happen to an evolved Skill Hunter is the idea that Skill Hunter could be inherited. See, one of the thematic conversations that's revolved around the Phantom Troop since we were introduced to the Phantom Troop is that the legs of the Phantom Troop are always replaceable, but the head, Chrollo, is not. Well, at least that's the opinion that the legs have, but Chrollo identifies himself as replaceable. He believes that the spider will continue going on even if he dies. It's even been implied that he's made preparations for his own death. And thus, one of those preparations is the idea that whoever should take his place after his death will inherit Skill Hunter. What if by stealing the national treasures of the Kakian Empire, Chrollo is essentially able to imbue the promise of post-mortem Nen, keeping the Skill Hunter a viable and usable weapon even after Chrollo dies? Now, this could present itself in a myriad of different ways. Chrollo could rip out pages of Skill Hunter and endow Nen techniques to members of the Phantom Troop, or he could simply hand Skill Hunter to the most promising member of the Phantom Troop to use it in his absence. But the main takeaway here is that this evolution of Skill Hunter would ensure that even if Chrollo died, possibly pursuing Hisoka or Tessie Erdnich, that the spider would be able to continue moving with the help of Skill Hunter. Which brings us to the plot repercussions of all of this. See, because if Chrollo's eyes are set on Parallel Future, and therefore Tessie Erdnich, that means that both Kurapika and Chrollo are slowly but surely making their way to the fourth prince. Chrollo, without even knowing, has his sights set on Tessie Erdnich, and Kurapika is trying to make it to Tessie Erdnich because he's a known collector of the Scarlet Eyes. And thus Tessie Erdnich is not only set up as one of the key antagonists of the succession contest, but also as a potential meeting point between what is now our main character and the man he's been trying to kill since the Kurta clan was wiped out by the Phantom Troop. But does this mean that we'll get a three-way battle between Chrollo, Tessie Erdnich, and Kurapika? Or will Chrollo beat Kurapika to Tessie Erdnich's room and steal his Parallel Future ability before Kurapika is able to defeat Tessie Erdnich himself? I can't say for certain. I can't even say for certain as to whether or not Chrollo's trying to steal Parallel Future. He could be trying to steal Emperor of Time, or Halkenberg's body-swapping arrow, or Camilla's post-mortem cat ability. But if you had to ask me who upstairs Chrollo is being directed towards, I'd say the fourth prince. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you think Love Dial 6700 is directing Chrollo towards? And how broken do you believe Chrollo would be with the ability to peek 10 seconds into the future? Let me know in the comments below. While you guys are down there, please, for me, like the video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you excuse me, I have to go to the range. I don't have to go to the range, but I want to go to the range, the golf range. There's no gun ranges in LA. I mean, there is.